I do apologize for that. So in any case, I was saying that tonight we're going to discuss diversity and job attitudes. And that's chapters 2 and 3 in the textbook. So we're gonna make some progress on, finishing the material. And just to look at the assignment for tonight and next time. So for tonight, oh, I see, I had forgotten the 10th. So I'll skip over, so we're actually skipping over to diversity and job attitudes. I'll leave the required discussion board on the small factory for October 1st. So you don't need to worry about that just yet. I'll give you a little extra time because I screwed up the syllabus. Yes, Joyce.
Can you let Omar into the Zoom meeting? He's in the waiting room.
I see. Okay. Omar is.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Joyce. So no discussion board. Next week is a holiday. Next week is our day off. My wife and I are going to go to Niagara Falls. We already had our honeymoon, but just for fun, we're going to drive up to Niagara Falls for a couple of days. But the following week, then we will do the career goals. So when we get back from the break, you should have your career goals. I was just at a session for my 3200 class, my principles of management class, put on by Andre Fontenelle of the Career Center. If you don't currently make use of the Career Center, I strongly urge you to get involved with it. Andre has a great deal of knowledge about how to find a job. He's very enthusiastic and can help you formulate your job search and maybe help you with your career goals as well. And he was talking about the importance of career goals. A lot of students don't have clear goals, but the thing is, everything follows from the goals you adopt. So the trick is to figure out what you want to do while you're still at this point in your life, and then target your courses and your activities, the extracurricular activities, networking that you might do, the clubs you join. It should all be targeted at the goal that you have. So if you don't know your goal, how do you know what kind of internship you have? Could I provide some details about career opportunities from the career office? I think what you're asking, Rima, is do they have job openings? And they do. In fact, he was complaining because Goldman Sachs, one of the most prestigious employers in the country, if not the world, is going to be coming to Brooklyn College on Thursday. And you should call them. Anyone interested in finance should be attending that, whether you have a job or not. You should be trying to network with firms like that. And certainly any college would be proud to have them recruiting at the college. I mean, they go to all the top schools, so that they're coming here is actually a bit of an honor for us. And you guys should be taking advantage of that, especially if you have an interest in finance. They're of course one of the 2 or 3 top investment companies in the world. And that they're based here in New York, of course, and if you do have a chance to work there, you should take advantage of it. So I see, I don't have my glasses on. Ben Vontae has a question.
Yeah, you said that the career goal setting is due on the 24th, right?
Yes.
But you put it down on Blackboard as optional. So are we
No,
supposed to
it's
do it or
on
not?
a discussion board. You can either, yeah, all the discussion boards are optional.
Gotcha.
So basically, you can either do it on the discussion board or you can do it in the session.
Ah, okay.
They're all every week we do that. So if you miss class, like there are 40 people here right now, there's 60 in the class. The other 20 have the opportunity to participate in the discussion board and get full credit for that. And it's the same with the 24th.
Okay. All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions about the assignments? Okay, I think I'll start with attendance this time. All right, Mohammed Afzal, Mohammed, Nabia Ahmed,
Here.
hello, Rima Akhtar. I think I just saw Rima's name somewhere. Rima, Omar Ali,
I'm here, Professor.
Omar Chastity.
I'm
Akina,
here, Professor.
hello, Nita Aslam,
Here.
hello, Natalie Ben Yosef. Natalie. Ariana Besesser. Ariana. Alicia Brooks.
Here.
Oh, hello, Alicia. Anthony Castaneda.
I'm here, Professor.
Hello, Anthony. Jerika Sapita. Okay, Jerika. Alea Charlton.
Here.
Hello, Soraya Chattery.
Here.
Hello, Gloria Christian. Gloria, I'm sorry, Glory Christian, I'm sorry. Not here. Crystal, Alea is here. I had Alea already. Crystal Clark,
Here, Professor.
hello. Elizabeth Desai. Elizabeth. Okay, Chinyan Ding. Chinyan Ding. Vladimir, is Ding here? Vladimir Duval Saint.
Ding said that his mic didn't work.
Oh, Ding's here, okay. All right, Vladimir Duval.
Duval Saint. I'm here.
Vladimir Duval Saint,
I'm here.
okay. Ben Vontae, I just spoke to. Jordan, Glenn Williams. Jordan. Okay. Dipu Hossein,
I'm here.
okay. Zinan Huang. Tanya Ingram. Prince Andy Isaac. Nikita Conan. Yi Lin.
Professor, did you call my name? Makita Tony?
No, I'm not up to you yet.
Alright.
Karen Lou.
I'm here, Professor.
Okay, Karen, thank you. Emin Malik.
I'm here.
Hello, Joshua Mamier.
Here.
Hey, Josh. Patrice McIntyre.
I'm here.
Hello. Zinrang May. Alexandra Melendez.
I'm here, Professor.
Hello, Alexandra. Afra Noman.
I'm here.
Hello, Omar. Omar. Deanna Pierre-Louise.
I'm here, Professor.
Hello, Miftahal Proga.
Here.
Hello, Guoming Kwan. Asif Rahman. Rafikar Rahman.
I'm here, Professor.
Hello. Safayat Rahman. Robert Rubino. Mohammed Sarwar.
I'm here.
Hello. Lauren Segal. Lauren. Margarita Sherbach.
Hello, Professor. I'm here.
Hello, Margarita. Hafsa Siddiqui.
I'm here. Yes.
Hello. Giovanni Simon. Chanel Sterling.
Giovanni's here. They said it in the chat.
Who's here?
Giovanni.
Giovanni, okay. Chanel Sterling. Here's Chanel. Janiton Sunwadi.
Here.
Okay. Sanzita Tanya.
Yeah, Professor.
Okay, thank you. Few more. Israel Latelpa.
I'm here, Professor.
Oh, Israel. Makita Tony. I know
Here,
Makita.
Professor.
You couldn't wait, huh? Abigail Tuachi. Abigail. Ghazi Udin. Ashley Vasquez.
I'm here, Professor.
Hello, Ashley. Yoland Wildman.
I'm present, Professor.
Hello, Yoland. Joyce.
Hi.
Woozy.
Here, Professor.
Hello, Joyce. Howron.
And Professor,
Yes, Joyce.
can you let Peter in? He's in the waiting room.
Well, actually, I don't see Peter.
Really? Because he just said he's been waiting in the meeting room since 7:50. I'll let him know.
Well, tell him he might have the wrong URL. Make sure he has this week's URL. There was some confusion because people use the old one.
Okay. I'll let him know.
Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Haorong Jian.
I'm here.
Okay, Haorong, thank you.
Thank you.
Xiaohua Yan.
I'm here, Professor.
Okay, Charles Ruan.
I'm here. I'm here.
Okay, Charles. I'm gonna call off the people that didn't answer. It'll just take a minute and then we'll be done with this.
There's
Uh,
someone else in the chat.
What?
There's someone else in the chat. Ghazi Udin.
Hold on, maybe I'm just not seeing the. Okay, I don't see anyone in the waiting room. Okay, so there's some people. Ghazi Udin, okay. Ghazi Ulan. Okay. Malik. Got Malik. Simon. Okay, so I'm gonna call off the people that I didn't hear from. Akhtar, okay, Rima, okay, Rima, I see you. Mohammed Afzal, Natalie Ben Yosef, Ariana Besesser, Eureka Cepeda, Lori Christian, Elizabeth Desai, Jordan Glenn Williams, Dipu Hossein, Zinin Huang, Tanya Ingram, Prince Andy Isaac, Nikita Conan, Yi Lin, Jinren Mei, Amber Omar, Guoming Kwan, Asif Rahman, Safayat Rahman, Robert Rubino, Lauren Segal, Abigail Tuachi. Okay, are any of those people here? Okay, Nicole, I see.
Did you call Chanel?
Chanel.
Natalie's here.
I did mark you present. You were sort of logging in just as I called your name.
Okay.
Yilin, I see, just came in. All right,
Professor, did you get my name?
Natalie, yeah, I do now, okay.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so that should take care of it. I have Yilin, I have Natalie, I have Rima. Okay, yes, there is a new link every Sunday. Okay, so tonight, okay, so the people who just joined, and just to repeat, tonight we're going to do diversity and job attitudes. Your discussion board on the aircraft brake scandal won't be due until the October 1st because I had made a mistake on the syllabus. So that you don't need to do that just yet. I think the material tonight is the stuff on attitudes a little bit theoretical, but it's you know, as with anything related to OB, there's some practical implications. Basically, what are attitudes? When you say the word attitude, does anyone want to tell me what an attitude is? You have a good attitude. Your attitude isn't very good. What do we mean by attitude? Natalie, since your name is up there. Natalie, what's an attitude?
Yeah, what'd you say, Professor?
What's an attitude?
It's a manner with emotion.
Okay, all right. So there's three components. The mental or cognitive, the affective or emotional, and the behavioral. All right, so when we talk about people's attitudes, we're talking about some emotional effusion that's connected with some sort of behavior. Like you can tell what their emotions are because they're doing something. Like, you know, they make a face at you, or you know, whatever it is. Now, why your attitude? Why does anyone care about attitudes? Why do we give a hoot about attitudes in the workplace?
Because you feel the attitude in the environment you're in.
Okay, all right. Well, also attitudes clearly are going to affect productivity. You know, just reading today about the connection between hypnosis and the media and the influencing of large crowds by public speakers. And there's close links among those things. And the psychologist who's writing about this mentioned that you can hypnotize someone to lie completely straight and firm between two chairs. You sit up, you put his head on one chair, feet on the other, and you can hypnotize them so they lie down and they're completely like a board. And normally this would not be physically possible. So basically what that's telling you is that people's emotional state, their affect, is going to have huge implications for what they do. All right, and you know, people who self-sabotage, which I've done on occasion in my own life, people who achieve more than they expect, people who do better than anyone thought, all these things are related to attitudes. And we don't totally understand, nobody really understands the human mind, but there's no question that positive attitudes will have consequences that are positive, negative attitudes the reverse. So you know, some attitudes obviously are more important than others. Your book talks about stuff like organizational citizenship behavior, OCB. Organizational citizenship behavior means you go out of the way to do something really positive. And that's going to be the result of a positive attitude. Okay, the opposite of that, you know, any sort of dysfunctional work behavior, any sort of unethical behavior, or counterproductive work behavior. That's the opposite of organizational citizenship behavior, counterproductive work behavior that your book talks about. And the counterproductive work behaviors, like say, sleeping on the job, sabotaging deliberately, goofing off, encouraging people not to work, you know, whatever it is, those kind of things. It could even be violent crime, stealing, whatever. Those kinds of things will also often result from attitudes. So the question is, the company would like to see people have positive attitudes. Attitudes have behavioral consequences, and you know, the most important attitudes are the ones that the companies are most concerned about. One of these is organizational identification. The extent to which employees define themselves by the characteristics that define their organization. If somebody identifies, you see yourself as part of the organization, people are going to have positive, you know, positive attitudes are going to coincide with the attitude of the organization. The thing about gig workers, and this is really important for today's world because so much of the economy is either in gig work currently or gravitating toward it. Gig workers will have much more short-term relationships with the firm, and so they won't have as much organizational identification. So, you know, my wife is really into this TV show, what's it called again? Downton Abbey. It's on Amazon. It's one of these upstairs downstairs shows. You know, it shows like the aristocratic English family upstairs and the servants downstairs, and how, you know, they interact and the different emotional things that happen to each category at different points. And you know, and there's, you know, all kinds of, you know, saucy stuff going on and so on. And basically one of the characters in that show is this butler, and he's so committed to the family. He's like, he cares more about propriety and making things right and taking care of the house and making sure everyone does things properly. He cares more about it than they do. He's so fixated on it. He totally identifies with, you know, and they show like the newer generation in the 1920s was much less interested in this sort of thing. And, you know, you see this in any company, in any college, there are always going to be people who are highly committed to an organization. There are always going to be people who are more at the margin. So basically, companies do want employees who identify. This was noticed by the early management theorist Chester Barnard, who wrote a famous book, The Functions of the Executive. And it was one of the first books on management ever written. Barnard was the CEO of New Jersey Telephone, which would now be, I think you'd call it Verizon. And as you know, you probably know, the AT&T corporation was broken up in the 1980s, and part of that was New Jersey Telephone was spun off, and it later became other things, as did Bell Labs and New York Telephone and so on. So basically what Chester Barnard noticed was that what he saw was the main function of the executive. He talks about a lot of important management questions, but the main function of the executive, in his opinion, in the next to last chapter of the book, and he talks about everything else first, is the creation of moral codes, that morality and ethics are really what the executive needs to create, needs to pose a role model to the people in his organization or her organization. And clearly that's going to be directly linked to attitudes. And in fact, ethics and attitudes often, I would say, overlap significantly. So we've kind of, I think I've already started to talk. We'll talk more about ethics rather, I think, when I do perception. But it depends how you view ethics. And I would say that if an organization can obtain the ethical commitment of at least some employees, it's going to have employees who are highly, highly committed to the firm, or who identify themselves with the firm. And the firm will then be in a position to push the ethical standards of the employees. So one example I can give you is where I used to work, Johnson & Johnson, and they were founded during the Civil War, a little before, and they started to become a big firm because they sold. So they were founded 133 years ago, which I don't know. I guess it would be in the years of credo-driven decisions. They were founded before that. They were founded probably about 160 or so years ago. No, this says they were founded in 1886, but I believe there was a predecessor company. Maybe I'm wrong. I thought I was pretty sure they sold stuff during the Civil War, but maybe I'm wrong about that. No matter. Well, that's a question that's not really important. So anyway, I'll put on the screen share. So where's the credo? I'm looking for the credo. What did I do with the credo? Oh, here it is. Okay. So basically, let me put on the screen share. And I work there, so I saw it. I know it not only because of having read about it, but I know it because I saw it in action. And if you look at my screen, it says our credo. We believe our first responsibility is to the patients, doctors, and nurses, to mothers and fathers and others who use our products and services. In meeting their needs, everything we do must be of high quality. We must consistently strive to provide value, reduce our costs, and maintain reasonable prices. Customers' orders must be serviced promptly. Our business partners must have an opportunity to make a fair profit. We are responsible to run to our employees who work with us throughout the world, and indeed they're in almost every country. We must provide an inclusive work environment where each person must be considered as an individual. So they're talking about diversity. We must respect their diversity and dignity and recognize their merit. They must have a sense of security, fulfillment, and purpose. Compensation must be fair and adequate, and working conditions clean, orderly, and safe. We must support the health and well-being of our employees and help them fulfill their family and other responsibilities. And it goes on with this sort of thing. And they say we're responsible to the communities in which we live and work, as well as to employees. And then at the very end, they say our final responsibility is to our stockholders. Business must make a sound profit. We must experiment with new ideas. Research must be carried on, innovative programs developed, investments made for the future, and mistakes paid for. New equipment must be purchased, new facilities provided, and new products launched. Reserves must be created to provide for adverse times. When we operate according to these principles, the stockholders should realize a fair return. So basically, they're saying they're a values-driven company. They believe in all the good stuff. Is it real? I would say yes and no. My ex-wife, Enid, she used to say they reminded her of like the 19th century capitalists who said they care about their employees, and then but they would have at the same time they take advantage of it. And there is sort of a mixed message in the culture there. Certainly, you'll see this in Disney as well. Certainly, they take the credo seriously. When I worked there in 1981, there was a terrible disaster. Somebody began to inject Tylenol with poison, and people were dropping dead from the Tylenol. And they had to decide how to handle this crisis. They didn't know which bottles had been poisoned. It had happened in different places. It wasn't just one city. And so what their solution was, they recalled every single bottle of Tylenol in the country at a cost of several $100 million, and then reissued new Tylenol and new kind of packaging. That's why the bottles now will have wrapping around them, because of because of what happened there. And you could say, well, they did what was right. But if you look at other things they did, often they wouldn't do the right thing, and they didn't live up to the credo. For example, when I worked there, they were selling baby powder and shower to shower. And this was 4 decades ago. And I went to the company store and I bought some shower to shower. It was kind of a nice thing. And people said to me, oh, don't use that, it causes cancer. They all knew it caused cancer. And yet they did not say this to the public. They continued to sell it for decades. So that paints a slightly different picture than the Tylenol thing. So, companies do try to live up to these high-sounding ethical codes, but very often the profit imperative takes priority, and I think the best path for businesses is to avoid harm. Like I think what they did with the baby powder and the shower to shower is outrageous, but I think companies should avoid doing harm in any case. Doing harm to others is always wrong. But with that constraint, you need to maximize profit. And I think, you should be honest about it. Very often what they're saying is right, that the best way to maximize profit is to be ethical. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. I don't see any conflict between ethics and profit maximization whatsoever. I think, in fact, more ethical institutions result from a focus on profit maximizing. The worst crimes in human history have been committed by firms that were not profit making. You can look no further than the Soviet Union, the Nazi Germany, revolutionary France, where 40,000 people had their heads cut off, and none of it was due to profit. It was due to ideology. The true evil in human society, I think, is more than anything, is extremist ideology that's committed the worst crimes. So in any case, firms should try to encourage a certain ethical standard among the employees. And also, related to this is to encourage attitudes like satisfaction. Satisfaction just means that people have positive feelings. They feel good about being at the company. The job involvement is related. It's the degree to which they identify with their jobs, as is empowerment, the belief that employees can influence their work environment. Empowerment, feeling that you have self-efficacy, greatly predicts job attitudes, and how much stress and strain people suffer. And it can also even predict to some degree job performance. So people who feel more empowered actually to some degree outperform. I'm saying it's extreme difference, but there is a difference. Outperform people who don't feel empowered. Commitment traditionally was thought of as comprised of affect, norms or values, standards of behavior, and continuance commitment. In other words, there was an emotional attachment, a normative sense of obligation, and a continuance commitment or a drive to continue. More recent scholarship has explored commitment as a psychological bond or a pattern of commitment. So it's viewed more contractually now. It used to be viewed as more affective and value-driven, emotional, normative meaning standards, and a continuance commitment, drive to continue. Now it's looked at more as a psychological bond. When employees perceive that the organization is supporting them, they tend to feel that their contributions are valued. Where in countries that are anti-authoritarian, like the United States, a high perceived organizational support is very useful. If people feel supported, they're going to be more committed. In more authoritarian countries, there's less concern for feeling that they're being supported. Employee engagement. If I talk about student engagement, I mean how much enthusiasm the students feel, how much involved the students feel. Job engagement is the same idea. Employee engagement is the enthusiasm the employee feels for the job. If people give their soul and passion to their job, then they're engaged. Obviously, companies want this. So if you increase people's autonomy, increase their ability to handle stress, reduce job demands, make things easier, you contribute to their development, then all those things help engagement. So basically, college professors have easy jobs. There's a lot of ways for them to deal with stress. They have a lot of time off. Their jobs are demanding, maybe, but not daily. All of these things suggest that college professors will have high engagement, which is true. Okay, so things like support, clarity, training, encouraging people, all of that leads to engagement. All that is, if you're managing people, you need to do things like that. A boss who's very supportive, who's going to encourage people to get engaged, who's going to make the work interesting, who's going to help them deal with stress. All of these things are going to improve engagement. Now, gig workers don't get a lot of that. So gig workers find that their work becomes more engaging if they can develop relationships with the clients and the organizations they're serving. So they tend to be more satisfied with their jobs if they have good relationships. They have slightly less satisfaction than permanent employees. Okay, job satisfaction varies by time period. In 87, so that would be 36 years ago, 61% of American workers were satisfied with their jobs. In 2010, which was the time of the Great Recession, when a lot of the financial companies failed, 42%. So it fell from 87, 61% to 2010, 42%. And then it came back a little in 2017 to 51%. What makes a job satisfying? One thing that makes a job satisfying is positive core self-evaluation. So people whose personalities tend to feel satisfied with the job, they have positive self-esteem and self-efficacy, are going to be more satisfied. Intelligent people seek jobs that satisfy their curiosity, so they will have higher satisfaction rates. Again, college professors are going to have relatively high. You would think so, but it may not be true. So there may be some flies in the ointment, but generally, if you've got some curiosity, you like to think about things, if you have a job that's challenging, that's mentally stimulating, you're going to tend to have a higher satisfaction rate. Do your interests match their jobs? If you go to the Career Center, you can take a vocational inventory and see what kind of job is likely to match your interests. Maybe you want to do that in advance of the assignment for the 24th. So basically, there's something called the Strong Vocational Inventory. And I don't know if the Career Center gives you that, but they give you something like it. And basically, the Strong Vocational Inventory lists a lot. It asks questions about your interests, and then it tells you what kinds of jobs fit your set of interests. Again, organizational citizenship behavior, OCB, means that you go beyond the job's typical expectations, you do more. If you are a salesperson, you not only sell the product, but you help the customer set it up, you let them call you, you help them when they're having problems, and so on. Employee satisfaction leads to positive consumer outcomes in the service industry. So clearly, satisfaction is connected to OCB. Your book talks a bit about the exit voice loyalty model. This comes from a guy named darn, just Hirschman. The name escaped me for a minute. Albert Hirschman, who is basically a development economist. But he wrote this book, Exit Voice and Loyalty. I was thinking about that show, Royalty. Exit Voice and Loyalty in the 1960s, during the time when a lot of college students were protesting the war in Vietnam. And he talks about how the attitude of loyalty contributes to people's willingness to protest. His point is that if you are more loyal, you are more likely to protest. If you're less loyal, Hirschman says, if you're not loyal, let's say you go to a pizzeria, you don't really care about it. There's 20 pizzerias in your neighborhood. There's one you go to, it's convenient, it's okay, you like it, but you know other ones are just as good or maybe better. You get into an argument with the owner, you disagree with him about a baseball game. So you say to yourself, I'm never going back to that pizzeria again, that SOB disagreed with me. So you go to another pizzeria, you just stop going to the one pizzeria, you exit. And Hirschman's saying that if people feel very little commitment, they'll just leave. So if you don't feel a lot of commitment to your company, you'll just quit. Whereas if you do feel a lot of commitment, you'll complain. People don't. What he's saying is that people don't complain unless there's some element of loyalty. That the reason they want to be, they want to spend the time and energy to complain is that there's some commitment. If you take someone who's a total nomad, there's this guy, Andrew Henderson, who has a site, The Nomad Capitalist. Maybe you've never thought about it before, but he basically says, like, if you can start an internet business, then you can live anywhere in the world. You don't need to live in the US. Increasingly, a lot of people, I'll show you the website. Increasingly, a lot of people, let's say you've made enough to retire. I'm sort of in that position. I can retire. I'm 70, so obviously I can retire. And but let's say you're young, you're your age, but you've started an internet business. Well, we don't have to sign up for it. He says, instead of living in one country, rotate countries, buy citizenship in the Bahamas, in St. Lucia or some other place like that. I think a few of the Caribbean countries will sell you citizenship for a small amount of money, and then live all over the world. You can live anywhere, live in Vietnam, live in wherever, wherever taxes are low. And you can even renounce US citizenship if you want. It doesn't really matter to him. So this isn't the class to go into this. I think it's an interesting concept because the world is becoming increasingly authoritarian, and I think keeping your options open is actually a good plan. But somebody like him, who is willing to renounce his US citizenship so easily, obviously felt very little commitment to the country and very little patriotism. It's harder for someone who feels more commitment to do such a thing. Incidentally, I'm not criticizing him. I'm just trying to use this as an example. I'm not being critical of him at all. I actually admire him. I think it's a really fascinating idea, and I think it's the future. I mean, if we can get over this fear of flying in airplanes because it hurts the environment, and that kind of thing. Basically, as technology improves and there's more and more options for traveling and living all over the world, I mean, why limit yourself to one country? I don't really see why. I mean, if you can live in 20 countries and experience new things every year, there's nothing wrong with it. Of course, it might be hard to form relationships. That's another set of issues, but that's not. As it turns out, my wife and I both share that sort of interest. My wife is descended from Mongolian descent, so she's got this kind of mindset already. But in any case, if you look at your book's model, your book takes this idea of exit, voice, and loyalty, and they say that there are both active and passive ways to react to dissatisfaction. And they can be constructive or destructive. So an active, constructive way to react to dissatisfaction is to voice your disagreement, to form a union, let's say, or to argue, I protest, or argue with your boss, or something like that. And that's often a good thing to do. If everyone's committed and everyone trusts each other, And you say, you know, Joe, I really respect you, but I have to take issue with this strategy. And, you know, you voice your opinion, that's all well and good. And it might result in a, you know, and it can be very constructive. The destructive, and I don't know that it's so destructive, they call it destructive active, is to exit. You know, sometimes exit is constructive. I mean, it may be you have a better opportunity, or it may be that, you know, things just aren't working out between you and your company, and you're better off leaving. Why it's not constructive to stay in a place where you're not really getting along. It could be more constructive to leave, but they call it destructive. And then the constructive passive approach they call loyalty. So they're not really using the terms the way Hirschman did, but the constructive passive approach is loyalty, and the passive destructive approach is just neglect, not paying attention to your work or not showing up, things like that. So basically, job dissatisfaction is going to lead to counterproductive work behaviors. Now, moving into chapter 2, I did chapter, I think this was chapter 2 and 5, 2 and 3. So I did chapter 3 first for some reason. So chapter 2, surface level diversity. Very, very important. Everybody saw in the Johnson & Johnson credo, they're very concerned with it. When I worked there was much less attention put on diversity in 40 years ago. There was already concern for it, but less so than now. Surface level diversity, your book says, is differences in outer characteristics, so things like race, gender, things of that nature. Deep level diversity is differences in values, personality, and preferences that become more important to determining similarities in people as they get to know one another. So in other words, on the surface, I mean, who really has more in common? You know, two people from different national backgrounds who work together in a military unit and are going to fight and die together on the battlefield and work with each other every single day, or those two people and people within their own ethnic groups. I mean, clearly, you're going to take on much greater camaraderie and much greater consonance with people whom you share these intense experiences at work and so on. And I think understanding each other is part of that. So people get to know each other and understand the deep values, personality, and preferences. And I think part of why my wife and I were born on two opposite sides of the world, but we get along incredibly well. We have almost everything in common because our personalities are similar. Our deep level diversity is similar. We, you know, and that's just how it is. People, you know, there are people who have completely different cultural backgrounds, but have incredible amounts in common. So basically, diversity usually means hiring and respecting individuals of diverse race, ethnicity, age, and sexual orientation. And many firms, most firms of any size, are concerned with these issues right now. DEI, of course, tolerance means tolerance of differences. It doesn't mean imposition of ways of talking on others. Those are two different things. If you tell people, oh, you have to use the pronoun I say, that to me is baloney. That to me is not diversity. It's totalitarianism. And I'm afraid that sometimes our society has veered increasingly into totalitarianism. You know, we saw this with the COVID stuff, and you know, the media just giving the same message everywhere you look. Any alternative view is prohibited. This is not characteristic of science, and it's not characteristic of a free society. It's characteristic of a totalitarian society. I was just reading this morning a book by a guy named Desmet called the psychology of totalitarianism. And, he talks about the different elements in that lead to totalitarianism. And what he basically said, I'm just going to show you the book. And what he basically says is that when people receive the same cues and are constantly prohibited from disagreeing, and people are encouraged to rat on each other. And this is exactly how Stalinist Russia was and Nazi Germany. And it's increasingly, what we see this increasingly here, that you have thought police and you're not allowed to say this, and this is exactly how corporations also inculcate attitudes. So in other words, this kind of totalitarianism thing is taking what might be good practice in a company where it's private and people can go home at night and say, okay, I had to play that game there, but here I'm in my private sphere. Instead, it takes this approach, this management approach that's so thoroughgoing, and imposes it on the entire population. And what you basically have is a populace increasingly indoctrinated into a uniform ideology led by people who are true believers. And I'm afraid this is what we're increasingly seeing here. So well, of course, diversity in the sense of encouraging a wide range of, everybody's included and so on. This is all good. Having a lockstep ideology that forces ways of speaking on people is not, that to me is not diversity. And so I disagree, I'm sorry if I offend anyone in saying it, but that's what I think. So basically, your book also talks about implicit bias. We've all got it. I first saw this when I worked for International Nickel Company back in the late 70s. I was in my 20s, and I grew up in Astoria, which was always a very diverse neighborhood. It's even more diverse now, I think. And I went to work in the corporate world, and there I am in International Nickel at One New York Plaza in Wall Street. And I walk through the building, and I go to the tax department, and the head of it's got a German background, and everyone in the tax department has a German last name. I go to another department, the head of it's Italian, and everyone has an Italian last name. I go to another department, they're Jewish, everyone has a Jewish last name, and on and on. So basically I said, holy Toledo, it's like insane. I couldn't, it seemed absurd. And then I saw the same thing in the academic world. I was teaching at Clarkson, and the economics chair happened to be Turkish. He was a good friend of mine. I think he's gone now. God bless his soul. But he goes to the conference, and he brings back 3 economists, all of whom are Turkish. And I'm not criticizing him. This is just natural. Everybody does this. We all have this implicit bias. I'm not saying I'm holier than thou, and I would never do such a thing or anything. I'm just saying it is human nature to do this. So this kind of implicit bias leads to discrimination, and I could, do we have the time to spend 2 minutes on the history of it? Basically, after the Civil War, and the 13th Amendment was passed a few months before Lincoln was assassinated, and the 13th Amendment freed the slaves, and initially the North was somewhat engaged in retribution against the South. They took over the government, and they appointed Northerners, and this resulted in resentment and so on. And however, when Reconstruction ended in the 1870s, you didn't immediately have a great deal of discrimination against the African Americans, but you did within 20 years, and it coincided with the growth, with the evolution or development of what was called the progressivism. The progressive era was a period that where there was a lot of weight put on rationalization of government and industry, on applying university-trained experts to solve problems, and on regulation. And the leader of the progressive movement of that era, with a capital P, it's usually spelled with a capital P, was a guy named Herbert Croly, intellectual. There were three of them, and they founded the New Republic magazine, which actually went out of business just a couple of years ago. It lasted over a century. And what these guys, Herbert Croly, along with Walter Weil, who was left-wing, and Walter Winchell was the conservative, and what they basically advocated was increasing government intervention in the economy, and that's when the Federal Reserve Bank was founded at the height of the progressive era, as was workers' compensation and all kinds of regulation. If you look at the wonderful History of New York video put up by Rick Burns, it's a 14-hour series about the history of New York City. And when they get to the progressive era, you'll get quite an education if you watch it. I highly recommend it. They go into the role of Al Smith and the Triangle Shirtwaist Company fire, and that the fire led to something like 150 deaths, and people jumped out of the window and burning to death and stuff like that, and horrified the city. And they pushed the Democratic leadership. The Democrats at that time had a club in New York called Tammany Hall. You should hear that. Very few students have even heard of it, but it was a huge part of the history of New York City. So hugely important to the way what happens in the city now. Even it's no longer in existence, or if it is, it's a tiny thing. Maybe it still exists, but it's really small or something. But basically, Tammany realized that they had to reform government, and Smith pushed through dozens of these new laws regulating hours worked, and health issues, and fire protection, and so on. And so all of this was part of the progressive era. And basically, the kicker is that a lot of this stuff, many of you are very, positive about. Most New Yorkers believe in that sort of regulation and all that. But basically, this was also the beginning of the real discrimination against African Americans. It was during the progressive era, and the progressives were more Republican than Democrat, and they were led by Theodore Roosevelt, who had been a New Yorker. He was a New Yorker, and had been. He was a New Yorker, and he continued until the day he died. He was a New Yorker, and he was a close follower of Herbert Croly. He read Croly. Roosevelt, TR, was a very brilliant man. He wrote many books. He was very brilliant, and he just absolutely loved Croly. And they implemented a lot of these ideas. He was not the reason Jim Crow was associated with progressivism. It was because the Southerners, given increasing government power, wanted to justify their racial prejudices. And the most important one was the Democrat who beat Roosevelt's successor, William Howard Taft, in the 1912 election, Woodrow Wilson. And basically, Wilson was a Southerner, and he believed in Jim Crow. He introduced the Jim Crow laws into Washington, and the southern states adopted these Jim Crow laws, and this in turn led to a great deal of discrimination against the blacks. I have little doubt that these laws contributed to the intense hatred that many Southerners felt towards African Americans and the segregation that went on. Part of the reason is that once you create a stigma being an attribute that cannot be readily seen, once you create a stigma, then that stigma becomes exaggerated. And I think, in other words, the laws created cognitive dissonance, and that intensified the hatred. So by the 1960s, when there were attempts well, it really started in the 1940s to integrate the South, there was intense reaction, hatred and anger, and basically this led to the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964 by Lyndon Johnson. Kennedy had tried to push it through. He wasn't able to. Johnson, who himself was a member of the Ku Klux Klan, he himself was a member of the Ku Klux Klan. He's from Texas, but no one knew that. If it had been publicly known, he wouldn't have been president. But it was found out decades after he died. But basically, he was able to push through the Civil Rights Act of 1964, despite his own personal attitudes. One of the things the Civil Rights Act of 64 did was create a distinction between disparate impact and disparate treatment. And basically, disparate treatment is overt discrimination. Okay, so if you go on a job interview and someone asks you, if you're a woman, are you planning to have a baby? And they don't ask that question of males, that's disparate treatment. Okay, or if you go on a job interview and somebody comments about your ethnic background, or ask you your religion or something like that. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 created 5 categories: race, color, national origin, religion, and gender. And it said any discrimination in those 5 areas is prohibited. Okay, now it later was added age in the Age Discrimination Employment Act, and disability in the early 90s was added in the Americans with Disabilities Act. Pregnancy was added, really part of sex discrimination, but was added specifically by a specific statute. So a number of these categories have been protected for quite a while. And you could argue that the modern Human Resource Department was recreated in response to the Civil Rights Act. I'd say that. I wouldn't say that's wrong. But basically, what a lot of companies found was that this focus on non-discrimination, focusing on disparate treatment, wasn't enough. And also, I didn't talk about disparate impact or adverse impact. So basically, I'll just put this on the screen. Adverse impact means that you don't overtly discriminate, but you use a testing method that's not job related. Okay, that's very important. Testing method not job related, and it results in discrimination. So to show adverse impact, you have to show that the higher rate for group B is less than 4/5 of the higher rate for group A. Okay, so if you've got 20 white applicants and 20 black applicants, and your higher rate, you hire 10% of the whites, so that's 2, and you hire 5% of the blacks, that's 1, that's less than 4/5. 5% is only 1/2 of in other words, 1 is 1/2 of 2, which is less than 4/5. So 1/2 is less than 4/5. That's all I mean to say. And so that shows that there's adverse impact. Okay, the burden of proof would then fall on the employer to show that the test is job related. If the test is job related, then there's no discrimination. Okay, so if let's say I say I'm gonna hire only the most only the tallest job applicants because I have a job that requires very tall people. You have to put things on a tall shelf every day. So you've got 6 applicants. The 3 tallest are all white. The 3 shorter ones are not non-white. If you just hire the white ones, that's not discrimination because all you did was base it on the tallness. The test height, presumably related to, if you can show that it's related to job performance, then that's not discrimination. Okay, but let's say you say, I'm going to hire based on people's ability to do something irrelevant to the job. I'm not going to think of it off the top of my head, but do something that's irrelevant to the job, like to play polo. I'm going to hire people who can play polo. But it turns out the only people who know how to play polo are wasps. All right, so basically all you do is hire wasps all day long and nobody else gets hired. So some employee says, wait a second, this is not fair. They play polo a lot, we don't play polo, so we're not getting hired. Polo is irrelevant to the job, so they sue. That would then, the company would have to show that there's some correlation between playing polo and performance on the job. If they can show that, then it's perfectly okay. But if they can't, then the person wins the lawsuit for adverse impact. So that's adverse impact. So you're using an irrelevant criterion to hire people, and then there's discrimination, and the company can't show that the criterion really is job related. You know, to take one more example, if you have job tryouts, let's say you're a baseball team, let's say, and you have tryouts for the team, and 20 people try out, and the 5 best people are all Hispanic. They hit the most home runs, they hit the base hits, they're the best player, and they have these objective, scouts evaluating the employees, and they have like a score thing, and they score each player and how fast they are and all the rest. And then they hire the 5 Hispanics, and some guy who's white can't say, oh, they used irrelevant criteria for hiring, I'm suing for discrimination because they only hired Hispanics. That's not adverse impact because they can show that these attributes are the best. Although if you believe Moneyball, maybe they can't, but they can show, I don't want to go into it in too great depth, but if they're using something where it's in the job, like they're rating each person's ability to hit a ball or to field a ball, that's in the job. And so that's called content validity. It's already valid. You say, well, Moneyball, really they should be looking at other things, like are they complementary? But that's neither here nor there. The courts aren't gonna penalize the team for the kind of strategy it uses. They just want to know, is it job related? So basically,
Professor, does it also have to do with neutral policy, indirectly favoring one subgroup over another?
Yes, yeah, that's what I'm saying. So it's a neutral policy. So there's an objective test. All right, it's neutral. But it favors one group over another. Statistically, like you have a baseball tryout, all the best ones, they're all Hispanic. Okay, no whites, no blacks, just Hispanic. Okay, that's just because of random chance that the best ones just happen to be Hispanic. You objectively, neutrally tested them, and the best players all turned out to be Hispanic. Okay, but it resulted in just Hispanics being higher. That's not discrimination. Okay, and the reason is that the criteria you used were job related. Whether someone can hit a baseball and field a baseball and all the rest, that's job related to playing baseball. So there's no discrimination, even though you just hired one group. Yes? Joshua?
All right.
Okay. So you know, this is getting into HR stuff. What I'm talking about is basically HR stuff, but it's worth mentioning. It's important to know about this. All right, so basically the idea of diversity, equity, inclusion is that we celebrate differences, provide access, equal opportunities, and include everyone. And that's all very good. Cultural intelligence means an ability to effectively function in culturally diverse settings. I think one of the big selling points that you guys can use is you attended Brooklyn College, one of the most diverse colleges in the world, and you're culturally intelligent. You know how to deal with multiple cultures. I think that's a very important selling point that doesn't always go mentioned. Okay, we just take it for granted. But you know, if you go elsewhere in the country, you don't see anywhere near this kind of diversity. You guys have seen it all. You're in all, all different groups. And so, you have much more comfort level with diversity. If you go, to the suburbs or you go out to the Midwest or what have you, the diversity level is much lower. And people are, a lot of this stuff is Greek to them. It's all theory. You live it every day. You're in diversity. It's nothing to you. I don't have to talk about it. You know what diversity is. You live it every day. I think this is a very big selling point for having gone to Brooklyn College, an important one. Okay, so your cultural intelligence is your ability to function in culturally diverse settings. So, you go to China. I went to China 15 years ago, and I had a guide, but I was learning very slowly. Unfortunately, I didn't learn any Chinese. They tried to teach me. I couldn't do it. I don't think I'll ever be able to. But if you can learn Mandarin, I recommend doing it because I think it's a very important language. But Hofstede's model of cultural dimensions provides an interesting way to compare different cultures. And this came from a study that Geert Hofstede did when he was a psychologist working in the HR department at IBM. This was when IBM was a very dominant computer company. They were in 130 countries, and he was able to get data on tens of thousands, over 100,000 employees. And he used a technique called factor analysis to try to differentiate how the employees in one country differed from the employees in other countries. And he found 5 dimensions initially: power distance, individualism versus collectivism, masculinity versus femininity, uncertainty avoidance, and long-term versus short-term thinking. He also found indulgence versus restraint. Let me revise that. I just realized long-term versus short-term thinking he found earlier. His original book just had 4 dimensions. I'm reading my notes here, but actually the original book had 4 dimensions. The first 4: power distance, individualism versus collectivism, masculinity versus femininity, and uncertainty avoidance. Masculinity versus femininity is sometimes called task versus relations orientation, which we'll talk about when we talk about leadership. But basically, task orientation means that you focus more on the task. Relations orientation means that you focus more on you're getting along with other people. All jobs have both dimensions. They have the relationship part. I was always much better at the task than the relations. But I think part of that was I was doing the wrong work. But basically, power distance means authoritarianism, how accepting of authority people are. Uncertainty avoidance means risk orientation. Long-term versus short-term thinking, you can understand. And he later added a sixth dimension long after he wrote his original book, Culture's Consequences, where he talks about the first four. He added indulgence versus restraint. Okay, now another idea, we're running out of time, and I just want to mention, is the idea of intersectionality, which is that identities intersect to form different meanings and experiences. So we're all cultural mosaics. We all have different attributes that intersect with each other and make us all different. Okay, so nobody's any one thing. Stigmas, let me redefine that term. I used it earlier a little more crudely. Stigmas are attributes that cannot be readily seen and concealed, such as gender identity. So your book uses it in a slightly more technical way than I was using it. The idea of cultural tightness and looseness is the degree to which there are clear pervasive norms and no tolerance for deviation. And to the extent that societies begin to impose this on a free people, you have, this is basically equivalent to totalitarianism. Okay, increasingly tight culture means, in a society at large, means increasing authority. Within a company, that's different. You'll see in Disney, in the case of Disney, that they have a very, very tight culture. And, they can take it with a grain of salt because eventually they're going to leave and it doesn't matter to them. It's different if you have a tight culture and you're not allowed to deviate from it anywhere in society. Okay, that's a totally different thing. Everybody must think the same way. And anyone who doesn't, we encourage their relatives to tell the state that these people are not doing it the right way. Okay, this is totalitarianism. All right, diversity management. I was talking about the role of law, the legal creation of the Jim Crow laws in the South in the progressive era, increasing the degree of racism in the South. I'm not saying they weren't racist before, they probably were, but I think it got a lot worse because of the progressive era Jim Crow laws. And so basically when people interact, they tend to lose prejudice. So if you work with people from diverse backgrounds and somebody says, oh, I hate this group does X, Y, Z. If you're working with them all the time, you're going to say, oh, I don't really believe that's ridiculous. But if you never see such people, you're going to believe these lies. Okay, so basically, to the extent that people get segregated from each other, the degree of prejudice is going to increase. There's also the idea of common in-group identity. And this is something that companies can use. They have, in order to unite the company, they say they have to say, well, we're going to hire people from diverse backgrounds, and we appreciate that. But we need to also focus on what unites us. What do we have in common? And that's where something like the Johnson & Johnson Credo comes in handy, because what a company like Johnson & Johnson is doing is they're taking people, and they had this problem before the emphasis on diversity of the last 20 years. I think part of the reason they have the credo is that J&J is really an agglomeration of many different kinds of companies. Janssen Pharmaceuticals invented one of the COVID vaccines. J&J Baby Products makes diapers, and on and on. They have Ethicon makes birth control pills, and dozens and dozens of these different divisions. I think it's like 150 different divisions, each one in a different business. And many of these businesses have very little in common. So, a firm like Janssen Pharmaceuticals got these research scientists, these brainy people who invent new drugs and stuff. Johnson & Johnson products, they're making baby shampoo. It's, very manufacturing oriented. You've got blue collar people and, plant managers and stuff. These businesses have very little in common. And so how do you unite the company? How do you make it into one company? And the way you do that is through the Pledge of Allegiance, which we as Americans have. If you want to destroy America, then say we don't want the Pledge of Allegiance. But if you want to destroy J&J, say we don't want the credo. So basically what the credo does is it unites all these diverse companies, and it would have the same effect for cultural diversity and things like that. So the way that you unite diverse groups is by focusing on what they have in common, the values they have in common. And just in conclusion, the best way for diversity management is to treat everyone as an individual, and for everyone to improve their cultural IQ, their CQ, cultural intelligence, and basically encourage open-mindedness and ability to work with others. And I think being in New York and being part of Brooklyn College, that part of it is an important part of your learning experience. Not that you don't have it anyway, but I think going to a college where you meet diverse people is a big asset. Okay, well, that's all for today. Next week is a holiday. And then the time after that, we're going to do your goal setting. So you should be thinking about what your career goals are. So are there any, let me close this. So are there any questions at this point about anything? No questions?
I mean, maybe Professor, yes, maybe I need for you to go just slightly more in depth when it comes to instrumental and I'm looking at terminal ethics. When you say that, I mean, I think I looked in the book and I see that it has to do with things that I want to, how I want the end of my like goal, my career to be, at the end, and then whatever, I guess, behaviors and modes that I use would be instrumental, but maybe more examples would help me.
Yeah, so
if possible. So
basically your terminal values are the values that you're aiming for. So I was just in the Career Center today with my 3200 class, and Andre Fontenelle said he always wanted to be someone who helped people get to where they want to go. When he was a little kid, he told his parents he wanted to be a cab driver so that he could help them get to where they want to go. And then when he grew up, he decided he wanted to be a career advisor, because he's now doing that, but in a more meaningful meaning of that he's helping the students get to where they want to go. So he's fulfilling his terminal value of helping people by being a career advisor. So the terminal value is, say, helping people get to where they want to go. Now, the instrumental value would more be something like, do I do this in an ethical way? Do I cheat when I do my work? Do I put the customer first? How do I function? Okay, so
okay,
instrumental values are more things like the values that guide your everyday actions and the choices you make. Am I honest? Do I have prudence? Do I have courage? Do I have patience? Do I have moderation? I'm talking about the words I'm giving you are all from the Aristotelian. Aristotle talked about these as virtues. Do I have these virtues? Justice. Am I just? Do I care about justice? You may not. I'm not saying everybody's a goody two shoes. Everybody's different. So basically, you got to decide, what are my values that will drive how I behave? Will I be honest? Is that important to me? Will I be somebody who's very competitive? Will I be someone who's very ambitious? Will I be someone who's very focused? Okay, will I be someone who's very just? Will I care about others? Will I support people? Okay, there's a lot of choices. Everybody's a little different. Do you have to be, can you say to me, I'm gonna be the richest person in the world and I'm gonna be ruthless about doing it? That's fine. I don't care if you say that. That's great. Whatever you want to be. So, I want to help everybody and without a care for myself, that's fine. And whatever you want to say is fine. So, but you need to decide for yourself what your values are.
Okay. I think I'm just sticking to the modes and behaviors that they say. What type of behaviors would I like to upkeep as I guess set on this career journey and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good. Crystal, did you have a question?
No.
Oh, okay. All right. I think maybe your mic went on somehow. All right. Any other questions? Any other questions? Going once, going twice. Okay. Have a nice week. I'll see you next time.
Thank you. Have a good
You too.
Thanks, Professor. Have a good night.
Professor.
Have a good night, everybody.
Good night, Professor.
Take care.